Hi, Founder fans, Jason here. Today's founder is John Henry, a man whose correspondence almost single-handedly started the War of 1812. Now, there were many people named John Henry. We discussed a John Henry yesterday. This particular John Henry is very mysterious. We know very little about his early life and not much about his later life either. What seems to have happened is he immigrated to the United States from Ireland during the presidency of George Washington, and while he attempted to start several businesses, he was not successful in this manner. He was, however, able to achieve a commission as a captain in the United States Army during the quasi-war with France. During this time, he plays a pretty important role, commanding several forts in the Mid-Atlantic and New England. Now, of course, there were no battles at any of these forts. It was mostly a naval war and a quasi-war at that, but still, he makes a bit of a name for himself. After that's over, he moves to Vermont, and while he's there, he's apparently contacted by Sir James Craig. James Craig was then the Governor General of Canada and was working for the British, because Canada was British then. And Craig contacts Henry and says, "Hey, do you think you could spy on the Americans for us?" Henry does this, and in fact he sends back word to Craig that, hey, it looks like if we were to go to war with the United States, New England, who was not happy with either President Jefferson or President Madison, New England might just cede from the Union. This gives a lot of courage to Britain. Now, unfortunately, John Henry writes back and says, "Hey, Craig, here's your information. Can you please pay me? Because you said you would pay me for being a spy." And Craig says nothing, because he passed away. And when you're dead, you can't say a lot of things to a lot of people. Henry now is in a bit of a pickle, so he decides to sail to England in an unsuccessful attempt to get paid for his work for the British government. He comes back to the United States, and his decision is, well, if I'm not going to get paid for being a spy, well, I should probably get paid by the people I was spying on. And he contacts none other than President James Madison and says, "Hey, I've been spying on you. Here is the correspondence between Sir James Craig and I." Now, he knew Henry would have been well aware at this point that President Madison and many war hawks were excited to start a war with Britain for a variety of reasons, and they were really looking for a reason to launch the war. These letters gave him a reason, and James Madison said, "Sure, I'll take those," and he bought the letters, sight unseen, from Henry for $50,000. Now, this is $50,000 their time. It was a lot of money. For a comparison, instead of buying these letters, James Madison could have bought a brand new ship for the United States Navy. Now, the Warhawks pointed at this and said, "Okay, look at these letters." Once they got them and read them, "Whoa, look at this. Great Britain's been spying on us. We should definitely go to war." The Federalists, who again were not super keen on what was going on and did not want to go to war with England, the Federalists always had a bit of an affinity for England in the way they handled their business. They said, "No, first of all, why are you wasting all this money? Second of all, more importantly," the Federalists said, "how do we know this guy didn't just forge these letters?" Or actually, they said, "how do we know he didn't just make it up? And how do we know, President Madison, you didn't forge these letters?" Now, despite these pretty reasonable arguments, it went on, and the war was started, and these letters were a primary reason for James Madison to sell it to the public. I should side note here, during this time, let me say this. John Henry, after this, the war starts, and he goes over to France, and he spends the rest of his life in Europe. We don't know a ton about what he did. He does seem to have made a little bit of money, because he leaves a good amount of money in his will to his daughters, assuming that historians have found the right John Henry when it comes to that. He had become friends with a gentleman named Edward de Crillon, who was a con man, apparently. This happened when he was on the boat ride back from England, and de Crillon is the one who said, "Hey, you should sell it to James Madison." He later goes on, when he goes back to France, he wants to claim some land that he had bought from Crillon. But, as I aforementioned, Crillon was allegedly a con man, and there was no land for him to buy. So that's when Henry kind of disappears into the annals of history until, like I said, there is a will that seems to be his that we are pretty certain of. And that is the insane story of John Henry, a man whose letters, which allegedly were real, helped James Madison and the War Hawks convince the American people to begin the War of 1812 with Great Britain, which, I should side note, almost went very poorly. Did indeed go poorly for quite some time. This story of these letters is very infrequently discussed, and it is one of the most important moments in the early republic. So I hope you learned a little bit today. If you did, hit like, leave me a comment, let me know. You think these letters were real, or you think Henry just forged the whole thing? If you're new here, definitely subscribe. I put out videos 7 days a week about the American Revolution. For example, I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.